Hurricane season is officially here. In North Carolina, we know what the weather phenomenon can cause. Flooded roads, powerful winds, and communities changed overnight. What starts as a storm in the Atlantic can quickly become a threat here at home. As waters warm and the storms grow stronger, preparation matters. We are tracking this year's hurricane outlook and the risks facing North Carolina so you know what's coming. Hurricane season is different every year. It always runs from June to November, peaking in the fall. Nearly every time, we get impacted. We all know about the damage done by Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina. Nearly 2 years later, the scars remain. In the Triad, Tropical Storm Chantal hit Alamance County hard last year. So what can we expect this year? Here's my breakdown. The 6 months of the year, June to November, you and I both know it as hurricane season. And here in North Carolina, we're always paying attention, anxiously looking across the Atlantic to see what's forming by Africa, where it's going, and whether or not it's going to impact us. But before we get into the forecast, let's give you a refresher on what's required to make a storm. You always need this: 80-degree water or warmer. That warm ocean water is the fuel needed to create thunderstorms, and those thunderstorms need to cluster up and organize into areas of low pressure. The best way to get them to do that is to have gentle, calm winds so that they can get themselves going. Let's take a look at the ocean temperatures. Everywhere you see that's in that pinkish red is above average for water temperature, from the Gulf to the Caribbean, and especially in this zone known as the main development region between Africa and the Caribbean. It too is above average, not by a lot, but at least by a little bit, which means there's a little bit more heat energy available to create storms in the first place. Well, this year, an El Nino is expected to develop, and a really strong one. To give you a refresher on what that means, it's when the water is way above average along the equator in the Pacific Ocean. Well, how does that impact the Atlantic and all the hurricanes over there? Well, sure enough, it increases the upper level winds across the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic Ocean as well. What that can do is really make things difficult for storms that are trying to form. I'll give you an example. You see here how thunderstorms would try to develop in the atmosphere. When you have these harsher winds above there, they're not able to get themselves going and they can't really sustain convection, which means storms don't really develop. And on the flip side, you usually have fewer hurricanes when you have a strong El Nino present. But the thing about this season is that El Nino could be especially strong. And El Nino is considered to be whenever the water is a ½ degree Celsius above average in that Pacific region. A very strong El Nino is when it's a full 2 degrees Celsius above normal. That's only happened a couple of times on record. And get this year's forecast is calling for it to be 2 to 3 degrees above average, which means we could see stronger El Nino impacts than usual. And like we were saying, that typically means fewer storms. Take a look at this. There are some stats showing the differences between a La Nina summer and an El Nino summer. You can see very clearly the La Nina years tend to have many more named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes. So that would stand to reason that this year you might see fewer than we have in years past. So for this year, we have some competing factors. On the one hand, the ocean is a little bit warmer than usual. But on the other hand, El Nino looks to be a beast this year, and that could tear apart a lot of the storms. Let's see what the experts are predicting. Here are the numbers. If you look at the named storms, the hurricanes, and major hurricanes, which are Category 3 or higher, the forecasts across the board are calling for a near average season. The average is about 14 tropical storms and hurricanes combined, 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. It looks likely to me that this year will be either near average or slightly below because of the strong El Nino that's expected to develop. When we talk about hurricanes, of course, North Carolina comes up a lot. Many people think that states closer to the Gulf should be more at risk. Meteorologist Alex Williams explains why some get so close to home.
If you've lived in North Carolina for any length of time, you know hurricanes aren't just a coastal problem. they impact the entire state. So what makes the Tar Heel State so vulnerable to tropical systems? It really comes down to geography. North Carolina juts out into the Atlantic Ocean like a sore thumb. It sits much further east than, say, South Carolina or even Georgia. Storms moving up from the tropics often track along the warm waters of the Gulf Stream, which runs just offshore. Warm water is fuel for those hurricanes, helping them maintain strength or even intensify as they approach our coastline. We're located in a common turn zone for hurricanes. Storms that form over the Atlantic or the Caribbean move west initially, following the trade winds. However, as they start to head northward, they're forced to turn north and east as they encounter the westerly winds of the jet stream over the United States. The angle of this curve is determined by a semi-permanent area of high pressure right here called the Bermuda High. When this high is weaker, storms are forced to turn more northerly a lot quicker. And this often makes those storms head straight out to sea, why we often call them fish storms. But when the high is stronger, like you see there, those storms start to turn more slowly, and North Carolina typically is at most risk of getting hit either directly or with a glancing blow. Both can still bring major impacts to the state.
Well, we can't talk about hurricanes without taking a look at the past. There are so many that have hit our state hard. Meteorologist James Scott takes a look back at some of the worst for North Carolina.
If you've ever been to a Brunswick County beach, you may know that there are very few homes there that are built before 1954, and that's because of the strongest storm to ever make landfall in North Carolina, Hurricane Hazel. The furious winds and 18-foot storm surge destroyed 352 out of the original 357 buildings in Long Beach, which is now known as Oak Island. Thanks to advanced warnings and evacuations, only 19 people died in the Tar Heel State due to Hazel, but the storm still caused $4.7 billion in damage across the U.S., Canada, and Caribbean when adjusted for inflation. Hurricane Fran joined Hazel as one of only two major hurricanes to make landfall in North Carolina on September 5th of 1996. Fran dumped 16 inches of rain across the Wilmington metro and left 1.3 million people without power across the state. Adjusted for inflation, the storm caused $5 billion in damage in North Carolina alone, making it the most expensive statewide natural disaster at the time. Next up is 1999's Hurricane Floyd. At Category 2 with 105-mile-per-hour winds at landfall, Floyd was a prolific rain producer, dumping a swath of 1 to 2 foot rainfall from Wilmington up to Elizabeth City. The Neuse, Tar, and Roanoke rivers all reached 500-year flood stages or higher, putting towns like Greenville, Rocky Mount, and Tarboro under several feet of water for multiple days. Floyd racked up a bill of $12.8 billion in today's money and killed 51 people. Our third F storm on the list, Hurricane Florence in 2018, was one for the record books. Rapid weakening saved North Carolina from the strongest landfall in state history, but Florence still managed to dump 3 feet of rain in Bladen County, making it the wettest system the Tar Heel State has ever seen. The flooding around Wilmington was so bad that the city effectively became an island until the Atlantic finally let it go 2 days later. Florence caused $23.8 billion in damages across the Carolinas, which was the costliest storm in the two states' history until the next storm we talk about in 2024. Hurricane Helene. Just the sheer mention of its name dredges up terrible memories from the costliest and deadliest storm in North Carolina history. Ironically, this is the only storm on the list to not make landfall in the Tar Heel State. It first came ashore in Florida, carving a path of death and destruction on its way towards the Carolinas. Helene combined with a stalled front to drop a devastating 20 to 30 inches of rain across western North Carolina over the span of 3 days, leading to horrific flooding and an estimated 1,400 landslides. The Shenandoah and French Broad rivers overflowed their banks by over 20 feet at times, setting an all-time flooding record. 220,000 homesteads across the state reported some kind of damage, which contributed to a $62.4 billion damage bill in North Carolina alone. Helene officially killed 108 people in North Carolina, and 4 remain missing.
Now that you know more about hurricanes and the season ahead, we'll give our thoughts on what this year could bring and some of our hurricane memories after this. Hurricane season 2026, we are ready for it, and we're here to kind of talk all about it with your whole weather team assembled. Guys and gals, I don't know, this is always the time of year, I think, where the whole country is just kind of looking at the weather. Hurricanes are some of the biggest storms on the planet. What is it about hurricanes that tends to capture everybody's attention, do you think?
Well, I mean, they're just massive systems. Yeah. I mean, they take up your whole radar screen oftentimes when they move in, and not only are we talking about the tracks, but the impacts that come with them. And obviously, the Carolinas, they get hit by a lot of storms, whether it's the direct impacts, direct landfalls, or something coming up from the Gulf. So there's a big reason why we pay attention pretty closely around here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would say strength and size. So you talk about size, strength. I mean, they can just do so much damage over such a large area. We're talking, 300, 400, 500 miles across, and that's a lot of real estate that gets a lot of damage.
And that's a lot of people, too.
Yeah. It's just a lot of people, and it's part of the culture, right? Like, I don't know about when you guys were in school, they hand out those little sheets. Here come the storms, you can kind of track them. It really is weather on the big stage, and, we do this for several months, so hurricane season is a long one. Being in the Carolinas or anywhere in the Southeast, I think we've all lived through some storms. Are there any storms that stand out to you? For me, I have to say, the only one I've ever covered in person was Matthew. We were on the beach there. Chad Silver and I were out there with the camera crew. And every storm has its attributes, but for me, that one was spooky because we had the storm surge kind of coming under our hotel. You could kind of go through the whole list of all these different storms, but I think we all have some memories. What do you think, Claire?
I think personally, mine was Tropical Storm Chantal. With
Sure.
the amount that it dropped, even like over toward Chapel Hill, which is over toward James's hometown too, where they got almost a foot of rain, right? And it was my first tornado warning too that had actually been sent in from National Weather Service, being observed, marked as an observed on the ground, actually, being able to tear real estate and actually impact people. It changes the game. So that one was huge for me.
And right here in our backyard, and it was only a tropical storm.
Yeah.
So there are so many big impacts. How about you, Alex?
For me, it would have to be Helene. Being from East Tennessee, seeing the absolutely horrific devastation of towns that I knew well and landmarks that I knew well, completely washed away, gone, 50-foot tall, flood waters coming down. I'll just never forget Helene.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Helene, of course. 2 others that may not be as big of a deal for the Carolinas, but I remember pretty clearly. One was Dorian. I got to be in the eye of that one. I was actually in Oak Island when it came through. Obviously, this was a Category 5 at one point, too, just sitting over the Bahamas there for, I think, about 48 hours before it finally lifted north. Another one, this is kind of a deep cut here, was Fred, Tropical Storm Fred back in 2021. This led to, I believe, it was either 30 or 40 tornado warnings from the Greenville-Spartanburg office. I was working in Charlotte at the time. They came in on a Saturday as the weekend meteorologist, so that was a really, really long day for me there. So always remember that one, not to mention the flooding issues as well. And it goes to your point as well that it doesn't take a Category 5 to do a lot of damage around here. For example, Helene, that was a tropical storm as it came through, the deadliest, most costliest tropical system of all time in the Carolinas. So it's just all the more reason why we need to pay attention this year.
It's such a good point, and it's, we try and preach, I think, hopefully, to not focus on that category.
Right.
And that's the importance of kind of seeking out that local info, whether it be from us here at the Weather Team, the National Weather Service. We're going to try and break down the impacts, whether it's a Category 1 hurricane, whether it's a tropical storm. These things can impact the whole state in different ways, and it's not just the wind, and that category number is only looking at the wind. A couple of you mentioned tornadoes. Hurricanes are crazy because they have so many different types of weather, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking horrible flooding, and that can be inland threat as well.
Right.
So lots of rainfall, and that led to, of course, Helene's flooding inland, well inland. You've got horrible storm surge. You've got tornadoes. It could be prolific tornado producers, as you mentioned, Fred producing that many tornadoes. I think that's a threat that people just don't think of when they think of hurricanes. And then you've got, of course, the extremely strong, ferocious winds.
Yeah, there's just so many types of things. What are the biggest myths that people don't understand when it comes to hurricane forecasting I think there's a lot of things people might think, then they don't really fully understand it.
Well, number one that definitely comes to mind is the cone of uncertainty, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm not in the cone, so that means we're not going to see anything, right? And that couldn't be farther from the truth. We keep going back to Aline for good reason. I mean, technically, that barely came over the Carolinas at all, but that rain shield to the north of the center there, that expands for 200, 300, 400, even 500 miles, that led to that widespread rain on top of a precursor event, all of that rain ahead of time. I think we were talking about this earlier, 30 to 40 inches of rain in the Asheville area over about a span of 5 to 6 days.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much nowhere can handle that.
Yeah. And that's what you were explaining to us with how the cone works. And this year it'll be interesting because they made that little change where they're going to put the warnings outside of the cone graphic too.
Right, so they're kind of made with ellipses rather than actual circles whenever they're making it, which, you know, is a little bit of a fix there, but it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And, you know, it does change a lot. I mean, while James and I were in school, I think both at NC State, I think he graduated 2019. Florence was 2018, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we both were at NC State, and the forecast just changed so abruptly. It was supposed to hit the coastline as Category 5, and then ended up as a Category 1. Still massive impacts.
Right.
But that just goes to show you how things can change, even with hurricanes.
Not to mention, for a while there, it looked like it was just going to go out to sea. So I mean,
Right.
that's why you really have to pay attention to these forecasts as they evolve, because they really can change. Not necessarily on a dime, but they can change in a matter of days, and sometimes not even that long.
Yeah.
And as we go throughout the season here, you know, the multiple months, when we put our forecast together, we're going to use a combination of history. We have, you know, looking back at the historical tracks, what usually happens in the Carolinas, but also the newer technology. And some of the newer technology nowadays is even incorporating some of that AI to use some of that history. Last year, Google developed a model that the Hurricane Center is referencing, and they're using it, and it performed fairly well. So we'll see how that goes. We're going to have an interesting year with that Super El Nino, as they're calling it. That can sometimes suppress the activity, but the time will tell. And we appreciate you for counting on us for that weather information. Stick around, the special continues after this. Find out what names are going to be on that list. One of the things that makes hurricanes unique, they have names. Every year we get a new list to use. The list has 21 names running A through W. These are this year's. Names began back in 1954 and started with only female ones. Since 1979, they've switched male-female back and forth with each storm. The names on the list are selected from different countries that get hit by Atlantic hurricanes, which is why some are from different languages. The lists are reused every 6 years. When a hurricane threatens, one image quickly takes over your screen: the cone. Despite how often we see it, it's often one of the most misunderstood parts of the forecast. Meteorologist Claire Fry explains what the cone actually shows and what it doesn't.
When a hurricane is approaching, one graphic you'll see everywhere is the cone of uncertainty. It's one of the most important tools we have, but also one of the most misunderstood. Let's walk through what it actually means. The cone from the National Hurricane Center shows the probable path of the center of the storm. In other words, where the eye is most likely to track over the next 5 days. That cone has been created using historical forecast errors for the last 5 years. Meteorologists place a series of circles along the forecast track at 12, 24, and 48 hours and beyond, and size those circles so about 2/3 of past forecast errors fall within them. When you connect those circles, you get the cone. Now here's the most important point. The cone is not a map of impacts. It does not show you where the worst weather will be. In fact, one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you're outside the cone, then you're safe. Well, that's not the case. Hazards like heavy rain, damaging winds, storm surge, and tornadoes can extend hundreds of miles away from the center, well outside of the cone. Another misconception, the cone will tell you how strong the storm will be. It doesn't. It doesn't show intensity, wind size, or rainfall. It's strictly about the track of the center. You'll also notice the cone gets wider over time. That's not because the storm is expected to grow, it's because uncertainty increases the farther out you go in the forecast. Now for 2026, there are some important updates. The National Hurricane Center is testing an experimental cone that uses ellipses instead of circles. This helps account for errors not just in direction, but also in speed. whether the storm is faster or slower than the forecast. This new version expands the probability range, capturing about 90% of possible track scenarios, compared to the traditional 67%. There are also improvements to better highlight inland risks, with all land-based, coastal, and inland tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings in effect. So when you're looking at the cone, remember this. It's a tool to show you where the center might go, not where the impacts will occur. The smartest way to stay safe is to focus on the full forecast, including watches, warnings, rainfall, and wind, not just the cone. Because when it comes to hurricanes, the danger doesn't stay inside the lines.
You can count on us to keep you informed throughout hurricane season. No matter what comes our way, we'll make sure you are prepared on air, online at WFMYnews2.com, and of course on WFMY Plus. That way you never miss an important alert. Be safe.